Welcome to this video. We're going to look at Unit 30. So let's jump right into it. There's going to be two sections actually here. The first section here is note 30.1. We're looking at compound verbs with forms of malet and madrak. So let's look at the examples. Anten b'mayete dasalin. I'm pleased to see you. Ethiopia Negust Mangist Bank Kahulu Kafyala, no? The Imperial Bank of Ethiopia is the most important bank in Ethiopia. Karambalo Mata, he came early. Uchbalu, sit down. All of you, sit down. Batan, Balana, come quickly. Tagabalo Sumun Tayako. Yaso Kutar Barkat Yala, no? The earlier one was he came near and asked his name, and then this last one, the population is quite large. Kazitanish rak below until the garage Allah. There's a large garage not far from here. On the next page, we see the infinitives of these verbs. Das malet, to be pleased. Kaf malet, to be important. Gram malet, to be somewhat earlier. Uch malet, to sit down. Batan malet, to be quicker. Aga malet, to be somewhat nearer. Barakat malet, to be larger. And rak malet, to be somewhat farther. These compound constructions kind of fall into three categories as the author presents it. First one is a derivative noun where it's not used independently in a meaningful sense. So like looking at des malet, it's related to the noun desita, which is pleasure, and then kaf malet related to kafata, which means height. Then the second type of these compound verbs is what they call an onomatopoeic word, which is a word that sounds like what it means. And in English, we have various forms of those kinds of words. It's kind of tough to come up with an example at the moment, but you have words that are basically the way it sounds, the way we hear it is the actual word itself. So, and then in Amharic, of course, their version of an onomatopoeic word is going to be a little bit different. So some of these examples are wow malet, to bark, meow malet, to mew, I guess a cat, mbwa malet, to bellow, and malet, to call for help. And that is something that someone might say if they're in danger or they need help, they're going to yell at and so that's a really good example where the sound itself is just the word, the same thing as the word. Then the third type is a noun derived from a verb. So for rak malet, comes from raka marak, to be far. Barakat malet, from barakata mabarakat, to increase. And then fatan malet, from fatana maftan, to be quick. And this is going to fall under the inconclusive aspect of this particular type falls into the inconclusive type, and we're going to look at that in the next section here. And but before we get to that, let's look at this next note that's mentioned, where compound verbs with malet are intransitive, whereas the transitive forms are going to take madrak. So this is going to be an important distinction here. So if it's intransitive, it's going to take malet, and then the transitive form is just going to take madrak. So kuch, uch, madrak, to seat or to cause to sit down. That's going to be the transitive form. Kaf madrak, to elevate, to lift up. And then the gerund of the compound verbs with malat, it's often used adverbally. So you'll see Krembelo mata, he came earlier, as opposed to he came early. Rakbelo heda, he went farther. Agabelo takamata, or takamata, he sat near. Uchbelo yibalal, he eats sitting. The way he does the action. Then the verb desmalet, to please, and it is an impersonal verb. And go back to note 20, to unit 20, note 20.2, to review those impersonal verbs when we talked about it at that time. And the most used forms are here in this table: desalen, desala, desalo, etc. I'm pleased, you're pleased, he's pleased. You'll see these used quite frequently, so it's worth studying these and remembering them. And then you see the forms for the present perfect and the past perfect. For the present perfect, despelon nabar, despelohal, despelotal. And then for the past perfect, past perfective, despelon nabar, I was pleased, I was happy. Despelon nabar, you were pleased or happy. And then the imperfective, des yilanyal, I'll be pleased or happy. Des yilahal, you will be pleased or happy. And then one thing to note is that for the present and present perfect tenses, which were these first two sections that they presented, those are equivalent to I'm happy, you're happy. So it can be translated either way. It kind of more directly is I'm pleased, you're pleased, but colloquially or idiomatically, you would translate it as I'm happy, or I've been happy. And that covers it for note 30.1. And now we're going to look at note 30.1.1, looking at the inconclusive aspect of the verb. The inconclusive aspect describes an action that's not entirely completed or temporary or happened for a short amount of time or happened in a small degree, such as somewhat, or it's not thoroughly performed. So that's kind of what that's getting at there, especially by the term itself, inconclusive aspect. There's just something about which it's not a final, complete, thoroughly done action. So Gaba, for example, he entered, versus Gaba'ala, he came in for a very short time. Azana, he was sad, third person masculine perfective there. Azanala, he was somewhat sad. Falaga, he looked for, again, perfective. Falag adaraga, he looked for, but not very thoroughly. And again, just like what we saw in the previous section, as a general rule, the transitive forms take the form madrak, whereas the intransitive form verbs take malat. So you see here two examples, mamtat and mustat, to come, to give, mata malat, to drop in for a while, and then tsatat madrak, to give reluctantly, or to give a small amount. When we look at the first part of these compound verbs, or these verbal nouns, you'll see the distribution of vowels in 3 and 2 radical verbs. So take a look at this, and as with other sections where you saw vowel distribution, again, it's just about the understanding how those vowels change, how the forms change as you go from one tense to another, or from infinitive to verbal noun, et cetera, et cetera. So wasada becomes wasad, nagara becomes nagar, falaga becomes falag, malasa becomes malas, and so on. And then you have the same word for 2 radical verbs. And the same for two radical verbs ending in such as sata, aya, laya. And then you have more two radical verbs where the second radical is always long, safa, zora, heda, shata. And then four radical verbs, sanabata, manazara. And that pretty much finishes that unit 30. So thanks for sticking with me through this, and it's onwards to the next chapter. Thanks.